economics newspapers now. And to do that, I'm joined by the UK editor of The Big Issue, that Paul McNamee, and by the author and broadcaster Emma Wolfe. Emma, Paul, good morning to you. Thank you so much for being with us. I hope you're having a lovely Bank Holiday Monday morning. All right, let's start off with you, Paul. The front page of The Eye, you've picked out this story here. Liz Truss is under more pressure, The Eye says, to offer help for those struggling to pay their energy bills. Tell us about this.
Well, I mean, the one interesting part to begin with is that we're starting to get to the settled belief that Liz Truss will be the next Prime Minister, even though it hasn't been confirmed. It won't be until next Monday. But within that, it comes on the back of some noises that came out of her camp yesterday that she wouldn't offer any more, which she's called in the past, handouts for people who are going to need help for the upcoming financial crisis. And this is just a set of warnings for her from within the Conservative Party and other Conservative MPs that whatever the targeted help that she has previously indicated, and it hasn't been clear, neither her nor Rishi Sunak, as we know, have been absolutely clear on how they're going to meet this crisis, that it will have to be much bigger than the targeted amount that she has had before. That there needs to be an acknowledgement of the scale of the crisis. She needs to stop talking about handouts. She needs to go beyond VAT. And it has come. There are comments when we get inside from a number of Tory MPs who are clear that the fears that their constituents have are not just fears shared by those who rely on benefits in society, but those who are in work. And whatever Liz Truss thinks or doesn't think or says or clearly hasn't said in recent days, she needs to up her game. And really, when people say this is top of her inbox when she gets into number 10, it baffles me why it hasn't been the only thing that's been talked about in the Tory leadership election so far.
Yeah, and a good point there made by Paul that you basically we're now sort of convinced that it will be Liz Truss who is the next Prime Minister, and still that fear that there has not been anything clear and no clarity from either of these two as to what they're going to do to deal with what is a crisis of a generation in terms of energy prices.
Exactly, and we've had, 6 weeks now of the Tory leadership hustings over the summer. A lot of wasted time, really, with people feeling this is an energy crisis that's absolutely looming, that winter is coming. We've had warnings, and just watching the prices going up. A few days ago it was £3,500, now it's looking like £4,000, £5,000, £7,000 a year for the average energy bill. Meanwhile, we've had the Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss show going on. Finally ends next Monday, and we will have a new Prime Minister by next Tuesday. But I think Paul's absolutely right that this should be, the number one priority. It is the number one priority across the media, across all political parties, and across every single voter. When you question them in polls, this is the number one anxiety and fear. It's not just a priority; it's really people are absolutely terrified. It's going to lead to real hardship and actual excess deaths as well. We can't overstate what a crisis we're facing.
No, it really can't be overstated, can it? Let's move on to, we haven't got endless time, let's move on to the front page of the Times if we can, Emma, because this is a story that really shocked me when I saw it this morning, that this is half of Conservative voters saying that they want for energy firms to be renationalised. Now, you might have to give us a little history lesson about the nationalisation of utility companies and how surprising it is that Tory voters are now saying that they want it.
Exactly, this was a Margaret Thatcher sort of flagship policy. So it's a really interesting study for the Times, a YouGov poll conducted for the Times, finding that 47% of current Tory voters, this is not the general public, Kamali, this is Tory voters, would favour returning the energy companies to public ownership. And obviously, as you say, nationalisation is a traditionally socialist policy. So this poll is being seen as very significant in terms of sort of stark illustration, really, of the pressures on individuals and households across the UK, and that the desperation felt. I don't think, Kamali, I don't think people quite understand the technicalities of renationalisation and whether or not that would be effective, whether that would work, and I'm certainly not the expert to take you through the process. But I think that it is a measure of how desperate people feel, that anything would be better than the current situation. Anything would be better than the energy companies, the so-called the bosses, the fat cats, the runaway profits, the dividends that we hear about, and yet the terrifying bills and predictions of energy price rises that we're all facing. The same poll, interestingly, also showed that very, very low levels of confidence in Liz Truss to bring down inflation and to get control of the situation. Around 13% of voters questioned had faith in Liz Truss, whereas around 70%, 70, do not. And this is the woman who's going to be, almost certainly going to be our next Prime Minister a week today or a week tomorrow.
Yeah, and Paul, your thoughts then on reading this story? I mean, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak would never get anywhere near, I think, nationalising energy companies. But the Labour Party also have said that they don't want to bring back nationalisation of these utility firms. So what do you make of this poll that we're seeing?
Well, I think it reflects a huge change in where society is, where it believes we need to go. Why the Conservative Party have had their head in the sand during the last number of weeks when they've been talking to each other rather than looking at the reality of Britain. But also that even though it is a really tough thing to try and reconcile, how do we nationalise when an awful lot of the energy companies are owned by nations anyway, to some degree or another? How do you make sure that the best is done for the people of Britain? We look back to 2008, Gordon Brown essentially nationalised a couple of banks, buying up to 8% of them, and then allowed them to be brought back into private control. So there are means for this to happen, and I think that near history allows people to see that when there is will and proper fiscal management, things can be done. And it is fascinating that though Liz Truss is going to be our Prime Minister, nobody trusts her to do that. They do not think that she has got the wherewithal to get into the heart of it and deliver for the people.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's 160,000 Conservative Party members who are going to vote for her, not the rest of us, of course, potentially. All right, let's move on to the front page of the Daily Telegraph, and this is one that you've picked up, Paul, on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. This is Boris Johnson has been saying a few things in the past couple of days, and this is one particularly on green energy.
Yeah, he's obviously been reflecting during his holidays on what is going to come next. And it feeds on from the idea of nationalisation of utilities and energy provision. And he is urging the next leader and the next Prime Minister not to get rid of the net zero policy that Britain has adopted and said that they will get to, so that we are not using fossil fuels to produce our energy needs. And within the story, is looking towards five-fold increase in wind power by 2030, a huge increase in the number of nuclear power stations. These eminently sensible ideas, if we are to take back control of our energy provision and meet the energy needs of Britain without having to rely on externals, which of course has exacerbated the problem that we're in at the moment. The problem of its cost. How, when you're in the teeth of a crisis like this, do you allocate money to it? We've seen that Sizewell B, the new Hinkley Point power station, which is still not quite approved, could cost 20 billion, could cost up to 26 billion. Not all public money, but whenever any of this is discussed, the cost of it becomes the barrier. And it is fascinating that as his legacy, Boris Johnson is settling on this.
Yeah, and Emma, I won't get you to pick up on that if you don't mind. I'd like to move on to the front page of The Guardian, because there's an amazing story here, an exclusive on the front page of The Guardian, that Black and Asian cancer patients have to wait 6 weeks longer, I believe it is, to get their diagnosis than white patients. Startling figures that The Guardian have pulled out.
Yeah, really alarming investigation reported in The Guardian that Black and Asian people, as you say, waiting up to 6 weeks longer for that crucial cancer diagnosis. For some cancers, such as stomach, esophagus, and some forms of myeloma, which is blood cancer, the median diagnosis time for white people is 93 days, whereas that rises to 127 days for black people. So that's up to a month longer. And the crucial thing about these cancers is you've got to diagnose them early. You know, your treatment options, well, obviously treatment options are going to be less effective the longer you wait, but also they may be more limited. There may be fewer treatment options. These results are really, really disturbing, and the government and the NHS have repeatedly promised to tackle ethnic inequalities in terms of healthcare. But results like this, studies like this, it's an analysis of around 127,000 patients over a decade. So it's pretty, it's pretty in-depth research. It shows that things are not actually getting better.
No, they're not. And Paul, we haven't got loads of time, but I want you to get your comments on this. I mean, normally when we have these sort of waiting list times, it's blamed on economic pressures. But there's something else going on here, obviously, isn't there?
Clearly. And whether that is because there is some kind of inherent bias against people of different ethnicity, or it is just simply because figures are not being inputted properly and help is coming, it isn't clear. But there is a problem there that needs dealt with, and at least if it is aired and it's in the open, there's more potential for it to get fixed.
Absolutely right. Okay, Paul, Emma, for now, appreciate that. Thank you. We'll be back with you next hour for more on what's in the papers this Monday. Thank you for now. All right. Now, plenty more to come here on Sky News Breakfast, including we'll have, of course, more on warnings about the cost of living crisis, as 1 in 4 people say they won't turn their heating on this winter because of an increase in energy costs. We'll be speaking to a representative of the Conservative Party, Victoria Prentice, in just a few minutes' time to get her take on what the government are going to be doing to alleviate people's concerns this winter.